Discuss with us the biofuel policy in your country, Norway.
Yes, I will. Standing in for our director of the climate department, Siri Sorteberg, who was unfortunately unable to attend. So the Norwegian Environment Agency, or Miljødirektoratet, as we're called in Norwegian, our primary tasks are to reduce GHG emissions, manage Norwegian nature, and prevent pollution. And in the climate department, one of the several things we're working on is we are the regulatory authority on fuel and also biofuels. And specifically, we work on this sales requirement, which I'll talk about in very shortly, and of course, to ensure that the biofuel fulfills the sustainability criteria that we have in Norway. So, shortly repeat our emission targets for Norway, which was showed a little bit by Duncan earlier, and talk about our biofuel regime and some news, or at least what we're working on at the agency at the moment. So first of all, our targets according to the Paris Agreement is to reduce our emissions by at least 40% in 2030. And we're going to do this in cooperation with the EU. And of course, in the non-ETS sector, where transport lies, our preliminary target is 40%, but the current government's aim is to reduce it by 45% compared to 2005. And as Duncan showed you, here are the Norwegian emissions, and transport is the largest sector in the non-ETS sector, about 30%, so almost the same amount of emissions as in the UK. So deep cuts are necessary in road transport and in the other transport sectors to achieve our climate goals. And there are two technologies that the government is working on to achieve that goal. First of all, electrification that we just heard about, and I think in 2019 the share of electric vehicles sold will be 45% of all new sales in 2019. That's how we're looking at the moment. But of course also biofuels is very important, and since we know that in Norway the average lifetime of a personal car is 18 years, meaning that even if you buy fossil fuel cars today, it will still be on the road for decades to come, as well as of course heavy-duty vehicles in shipping and in aviation. So what are the policy measures that we're using in Norway? First of all, it's this sales requirement. It's sort of a quota obligation, and it's currently for road transport, and from the next year it will also be in aviation. And all the biofuels sold as part of that requirement has to fulfill some sustainability criteria, which I will return to shortly. So that's the main driver of biofuel sales in Norway. And also we have quite strong tax incentives. They're exempted from CO2 tax, and also biofuels that are sold outside the sales requirement are also exempt from this, what we call road usage tax, or veibruksavgift in Norwegian. And of course, locally, we have cities and counties are ambitious in their local targets, and they use public procurement to buy biofuels and biogas for specifically buses, city buses, and also renovation vehicles. And biofuel production can be supported by Enova. Enova is a state enterprise owned by the Ministry of Climate and Department, which supports efficient technology and efficient technology and the development of climate technology. So Enova can support biofuel production facilities, and particularly have supported biogas facilities as well. It can also support infrastructure. So some biogas filling stations have been supported partly by Enova. So let's take a closer look at the sales requirement. This year in 2019, it's 12%. And that means fuel suppliers will have to supply at least 12% biofuel by volume as for the whole of the year. And 2.25% is now advanced biofuels, which I will return to shortly. And it's also 4% has to be bio-used in petrol. And when I talk about advanced biofuel, I mean with advanced feedstock. And in Norwegian regulation, it's waste residue and other feedstock, which is specified on the EU ILUC directive. So shortly, they could look at this very boring and long list, but it's waste and different types of waste and residue, straw, animal manure, algae, and of course also what we call Part B, used cooking oil and animal fat. So both of these types of feedstocks are considered advanced in Norway. And advanced is also double counted. So we have a lot of these types of advanced fuels, which I'll also show you very shortly. So the sustainability criteria, it's the same that there are in the EU with the Renewable Energy Directive. So the harmonized in Norway as well. So the two main points, it's a 50% greenhouse gas emissions from production from over the life cycle, as well as the feedstock cannot be from areas with high biodiversity or high carbon stock. For example, primary forests, wetland, those types of areas. And the sales requirement is based on volume, and like in Sweden. So here, as Duncan showed you, now it's 2019, it's 12%. And also you see this advanced here, which is double counted. Next year, it's increasing to 20%, with 4% has to be advanced, meaning the actual volume will be between 10 and 16% when you account for this double counting. And let's see, what does the market look like today in Norway? Here we have the volume of biofuels sold, not including biogas. It's only liquid biofuels, where you see it's been a quite large increase lately. Here's the axis, is million liters. So this is a very tabloid figure, because I've put a palm tree here to show the share of feedstock, which is based on palm oil and byproducts from palm oil production. So what we've seen in Norway is that in 2017 there was a large increase in palm oil, particularly HVO palm oil, biofuels, and there was a large amount of public backlash. NGOs and the media was very critical of biofuels based on palm oil, which then resulted in a lot less palm oil-based biofuels the following year. What I want you to take notice of here is that these numbers vary from each year, and they actually overachieve this sales requirement quite a lot. And that is due to the tax exemptions that I mentioned. The road usage tax is makes up almost a third of the actual fuel pump price. So this tax break, and also the one for CO2 tax, has been a large incentive to overachieve the sales requirement. And also, of course, we have biogas. We produce above 500 gigawatts hour per year, and 400 of those are used in the transport sector. And most of it is made from sewage sludge, household waste, waste from fisheries, and animal manure. And it's mostly used, almost exclusively used, in city buses and renovation vehicles. And from the next year, this sales requirement will also be in aviation. And the requirement is 0.5% of annual sales, and it must be advanced biofuels, the double counting biofuels. And in a volume, it will be around 6 million liters will they have to sell next year. And it will be a total sales, meaning it applies both to domestic and international travels. And the military is exempted because of fuel standards. So it's a new requirement, and we're very interested to see how the fuel suppliers will meet this target and what type of fuels. We heard during the public consultation that many are concerned with the price. So it will be probably about 2 to 5 times more expensive per liter compared to fossil jet fuel. And there's also limited production globally, as you know. And most is HEFA biofuel, jet fuel, and it will probably be based on used cooking oils and animal fats. That's what we think, at least from in 2020. And we're also looking at the shipping sector, the maritime sector. In 2016, the Parliament asked the government, we had a minority government at the time, to propose a sales requirement for shipping. So we in the Norwegian Environment Agency, we got an assignment from our department to assess this, and we have made several technical reports and studies. And the Department of Climate and Environment wants us to focus on biogas and advanced biofuels. So nothing has been decided politically how this is going to look, but we're currently assessing it, and we will probably, at least what it's looking like right now, that it will be on biogas and advanced biofuels. Because in Norway we have a lot of LNG ships, meaning natural gas ships. And 2020 and beyond. What's going to happen after 2020 with this sales requirement? So the current levels, or at least the 2020 levels, they will continue until further notice, meaning 20% in road transport and 0.5% in aviation. And we are now looking at what the obligations will be for 2021 and 2022. That's our assignment for this year. And the government has repeatedly stated their ambition is still 40% biofuel in road transport in 2030. What type of upptrapping how the levels will rise in the coming years is unsure. We don't know yet. And we're going to continue to look at biofuel in shipping next year, and still with primary focus on biogas and advanced biofuels. And the government has recently proposed their national budget for next year, and they have suggested a full road usage tax on biofuels from next year, meaning the large tax incentives, if this budget is approved, will likely disappear, meaning we'll probably see less biofuel on the market next year in road transport, and at least not an overachieving of the sales requirement. And that's all I had, and I'm sure you have some questions for me.
Thank you, Mats. Thank you. Yeah, I wonder, because Norway is a country where you have very large amounts of renewable electricity.
Yes.
And you have a lot of electric cars on the roads. Could you say something about how you work on electricity in conjunction with biofuels?
We're working in parallel, and as has been said earlier, we need both. And so we have large incentives to buy electric vehicles in Norway. So if you're at the car dealers, and an electric car, due to the tax breaks, will be as cheap as a fossil equivalent. And also you get several incentives during usage. So we see a large increase in the sales, and we're working and advising our government on how to achieve. They have this target of 100% electric vehicle sales of new cars in 2025. So working on policy measures and how advise them, if you want to reach this goal, this is a sort of measures you can use. And of course, that will have a lot to say on the fuel sales. And also, since it's the sales requirement is a percentage, and it's of course 20% in 2030 will not be the same in volume as it will be next year. So I think in the national budget, where they have calculated 75% electric vehicles of the new sales in 2030, the fuel sales will fall by a quarter compared to today. So the next 10 years, the fuel sales will maybe fall by 25%. But that means there's still 75% of today's fuel, so biofuels is still very important.
But when listening to you, is it like biofuels should go to like aviation sector more and shipping sector, or?
Yes, I think it's not a coincidence that we're introducing sales requirement in aviation and also now looking at shipping. So probably a shift, or will be that's what the government wants. Yes, but still in heavy duty vehicles, and yes, so we see the same thing as the UK and also Sweden sees.
Yeah.
But still, it will be a lot of you will need a lot of biofuels in the road transport for decades.
And what are your thinkings about importing biofuels and waste?
There's been a lot of backlash on palm oil, which I mentioned, And I think the government has repeatedly stated that if they're going to increase, or when they're going to increase the sales requirements, it will be on waste-based biofuels mostly. So we don't have a crop cap as they do in the UK, but I think the politicians and the government is very on raising the biofuels targets based on conventional feedstocks and crop feedstocks.
Sometimes when I look at different countries' way to meet their demand for biofuels, every country seems to love to have some import.
Yes, I should have mentioned almost everything, all of the biofuels we use in Norway is based on imports. And that's why it's so important to get the Norwegian production up, and especially all these new exciting initiatives based on byproducts and residue from Norwegian forests. So I think when the Norwegian politicians have set these quite ambitious targets, they really hope and based it on a large increase in Norwegian production. So we do cross our fingers for that to go online as soon as possible.
Yeah. Are there any questions from? Yes, here we have got a question, and over there as well. First here, and then to the left there.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. My name is Ib Johansen from the company Biofuel in Denmark. So there is one Dane at least here. My question is on all the, you mentioned all the sustainability standards and that a lot of it is going to be used cooking oil or something like that. One of the problems as I see it is that if I produce tons of biocrude, and we have shown that we can upgrade that to aviation fuel, to diesel, actually the process of getting a new aviation fuel approved is at least 5 years. So, and that conflicts a little bit with the goals of the politicians. So do you have a comment on that? Could you support it? Or
I totally agree with you. And as I mentioned, we see on the market or production today of aviation biofuels is HEFA mainly based on animal fats and used cooking oil. And of course, we need alcohol to jet with and all these other kinds of biofuels. And I totally agree with you. And that's sort of the Norwegian Environment Agency is trying to, when we're trying to advise our politicians, that's sort of things we're really trying to say very loudly.
Thank you. There was a question over there as well.
Hi, my name is Julia Hansam. I'm with the IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute. And I have 2 questions related to the biofuel policy for shipping that you are investigating. The first is, like, how soon do you think that could be implemented if you have a sort of fast development there? And the second is, have you seen similar policies proposed in other countries, or do you know that?
For your first question, if we get as long as proposing a regulation as early as next year with a public consultation, we'll have to probably at least a couple of years before it's implemented to let the market be prepared. So maybe from 2023, at least 3 or more years away. And for your second question, yes, we meet our colleagues from all over Europe, and we've talked about them with shipping, and it seems it's not as big on the table in other countries, it seems. But though I know at least in the Netherlands, it's part of their renewable fuel obligation. But it's still really early, and I think the only thing that's been used so far successfully is HVO in trials, and of course Maersk, which I know is attending this. Attending here will talk more about what their plans are, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you. And I also saw that in Sweden, Fossilfritt Sverige is proposing sort of a similar, just the other day, actually. So it's good to know. It was interesting that Norway had the same, I didn't know.
Thank you for that comment. There was a question back in the room.
Keith Simons, SH3 Energy. You mentioned that the military are exempt because of standards. Is it really a technical problem or a political problem? And if you set a law that by 3 years' time the military must have 5% renewable fuels, wouldn't that focus the mind to address it? Because if they're not allowed to fly their toys, I'm sure that they would complain even loudly.
Yes, we heard loud and clear from the Department of Defense and our military that they use NATO grade jet fuel, something called JP4, and also basically there's nothing problem with the biofuel. It's problem with their vehicles and their aircrafts which haven't been approved for it, certified for it yet. So they say due to safety they can't allow it at the moment. But we've urged them, and also urged the Ministry of Defense to. There's no reason that the defense also has to reduce their emissions. So I totally agree with you, and we should push them even harder.
Now there was a question in the third row, and then further back. But here first. Excuse me.